So
how does the festival market affect sort of clubs, in your opinion? Because I think in some areas they can say that if there's festivals on, it's obviously going to have an impact on the club in the area, and people are going to festivals more than going to nightclubs. Is that just a consequence of the booming festival market that we've got? Or
I think the landscape's slightly changed. I mean, being quite frank about it, vertical drinking is a thing of the past. People are absolutely looking for an experience as well as social engagement. Food has become more important. Definitely throughout the summer there is a pattern of people not going out, and I always say bricks and mortar or venues so much, but saving their money and going out periodically to a large event for a couple of days, because there is such a range of festivals within the summer months. People like that experience, that engagement with such a range of people. But, I'm being quite honest about it, the clubs and venues are fighting back. They're trying to balance the books in terms of what they're doing. There is definitely a lot of displacement in terms of finding very creative venues, whether it be warehouses or unique spaces to put parties on. It's interesting how things are sort of evolving. Nothing's quite settled. What we do know is the festival and event sector is booming at the moment. We know that there are some challenges in terms of venues, because they've got so many in situ sort of taxes, etc., that they've got to accommodate for. And there also are some limitations in terms of licensing, which we brought up earlier in terms of Hackney. And any new developments. So, that is always going to have that sort of concern in terms of people investing in Hackney, because they don't want to be stuck with limitations. They want an expansive opportunity to be creative if the landscape changes. But that then comes down to us having councillors and licensing committee members who are a little bit more forward thinking. Recently I've been to Glasgow, and we've got some fantastic licensing committee members who are forward thinking. Some of them are attached to the millennial sort of audience out there that we need to sort of engage with, that are thinking ahead and starting to understand what the requirements are, rather than just being resolute with a very old way of looking at things.
But up in Glasgow, they shut very early, don't they, in comparison to here in England, and especially London? Because some of their bigger venues, say like Sub Club, I know they shut at 3, versus a venue down here that can go until 7, 8, 9 in the morning.
Yeah, and I think the thing is that is progressing though.
Right.
They've recently just gone through a whole process of sort of planning in terms of things like agent of change, 4 a.m. licenses coming in, these sort of things. So there's definitely an open door in terms of people listening and understanding what the consumer requirement is. What I'm trying to emphasize here is, if you can sit down and have a conversation with someone, you can develop and move things forward. Within a lot of the experiences like Hackney, where it's a closed door, it's quite frustrating to be able to go out there and not have a debate or conversation and give the positives as well as understand the negatives, to try and create a position where everyone can win.
At that point then, do you try and get in the mayor's ear? Do you try and get in Amy LeMay's ear, people like that, to try and help fight your battle, especially in such a popular place such as Hackney?
We definitely speak to GLA. We speak to the Culture 24 team. We've got a constant open dialogue. As you can appreciate, and Amy quite rightly, and we've defended Amy at many points, because I think she's been between a rock and a hard place sometimes. Yes, everyone wants action. Everyone thinks that it's a magic wand to be resolved, but there tends to be layers of issues around it that people are unaware of. They can only see the sort of black and white perspective. And yes, like everybody, like us, we've got our shortcomings where we've got to step forward and do things a little bit differently to get it over the line, or have to forgive to move forward. Similar with, Fabric although it was a success and we opened the venue, there were a lot of conditions attached to that license. So while we say we had it open, there were also some restrictions which were put on there so that we could get it to that point. So, when you look at it retrospectively, yes, it would be great to, it's like XXL. I'd love to get to a point where we can agree with the developer to get to a point where they can extend where they are for a longer period. and then find them a space for them to move to, so it's seamless. At the moment, the problem is time's caught up with everybody,
right.
And we're in a position where there's a lot of pressure on GLA to get things moving. Southwark Council have obviously made a decision, and they're trying to facilitate a communication with the developer and Pulse, James, etc. But it's a constant challenge, and if I'm going to be honest, there have been some silly conversations in the background that need to be ironed out, which is what we try and do. So we are a bit more of a conduit to sort of smooth out and get some clarity on what we want to achieve in terms of objectives, because as you know, within our industry there's passion. When you get to a point where your livelihood is compromised, your passion overflows. So what we do is we draw that in and then make sense of exactly how we want to move forward, because people are going to get emotional about things that they worked 19 years on, and I'm quite rightly so. But people need to understand that and try and drive as hard as possible, and not allow sort of circumstances to sort of falter against those sort of actions.
Why does it come into that in the first place? So if I've been here 19 years, people have been coming to my venue for X amount of time, it's a hub of the community, especially within the LGBT community and all the rest of it, and it's a staple within that area. How does that happen in terms of, does the developer just come along and say, okay, when is their license up? When is their license up? And they're just basically marking down the days, and then they're going to say, right now we're going to put in a claim to get the development or the property? Because that's an area that's always fascinated me. Obviously what happened with Turn Mills 12 years ago with the whole thing at King's Cross, and then that turned into luxury flats, and I see so many documentaries and I listen to interviews where it's, oh yeah, this place was this club, it was so good when it was that back in the day, and all the rest of it. How does it even come to that has to close? Is it because it's sitting on prime real estate and the developers are literally waiting in the wings, or is it something else? I know I've just hit you with a lot there.
No. Look, every case is very individual.
Right.
So, for instance, when a developer comes in, look, London changes consistently.
Yeah.
When you look at the likes of some of the bigger venues around, like things like the Egg, and what's happening with Facebook and Google and the prime time in terms of property, there are focus areas where people are.
Is that going to go soon?
No. I'm just giving you an example of development areas for the right reason. And what I'm trying to say to you is, when an area becomes a focus, like Bankside and all these sort of things, where development's happening, that's where property investors focus. And if they can buy a property and it's a licensed space that they feel that they want to sort of develop on or add to, they've got to put a case across in terms of planning. The challenge that is quite rightly put forward is it's an LGBT site. It's been there for 19 years. We should be protecting these sites. I've recently had a big conversation with Jeremy Joseph from GAY, who's now looking to protect Heaven, because Heaven's been there for 40 years, and quite rightly so, again. Yeah. But why we don't get to a point of, the likes of Fabric, the Ministry of Sound, Heaven, Pulse XXL, however you want to address it, working a way that we can actually protect these venues so that they can't be used for anything else, because that's what they're there for. You can't change Tate Gallery. You can't, you know what I mean? And artistically, they're in the same thing. We're talking about, spaces which have generated a legacy of, youth culture, cultural space across the world, not just, we're known across the world for it. So why we can't protect? And the sad bit about it is when you talk to the likes of Lutz in Berlin and Mirik Milan, who used to be the Nights Are for Amsterdam, they're working so hard at protecting these venues. I mean, even down to the point that Berlin released the fact that they were putting €1 million aside, so that if there are any noise issues around their cultural spaces, that €1 million was set aside by local government to actually soundproof the venues to protect them.
Wow.
So when you look at the attitude outside of the UK against the UK, it's almost like, sadly, the nighttime economy as a whole is looked at as a lesser sort of position, although its economic position is as strong as hotels and etc. And it's a reason for people to come to the UK.
It's crazy because I go overseas sometimes to festivals and nightclubs like Berlin and Amsterdam and places like that, and it's true that the mindset and the mind shift towards those environments are completely different to what it is in the UK. It's almost as if they're from two different worlds. It feels as though the UK, London as a whole, as much as it is fast forward and moving, it's got a mindset of 20, 30 years ago, and all of a sudden these other European countries are pioneering a difference. And I just think if they could just sit down and all kind of work out the best way forward, if possible now, and obviously in these times of uncertainty, whatnot. But whether they want to have that conversation, we don't know. But I think it's frustrating as a person who enjoys going out to clubs, or did previously when I was younger, that in 5 to 10 years' time it may be completely different for the youth coming through now. Leading on from that, where do you kind of see the industry as a whole in the UK in the next kind of 5 to 10 years progressing, if at all?
I think we have got to, and I'll start with what we need to overcome, which I think is the important bit. There are some definite issues in terms of awareness of value in terms of cultural spaces, and we're talking about entertainment spaces. We need to evolve our our positions in terms of LJs and counsellors, because we're going through a period where we've got a younger level of counsellor coming through, where there is a bit more of a balanced response in terms of these cultural spaces and understanding of their value. So I think we are going through the process of evolving politically on a local level. On a national level, we've still got a bit of a way to go. We've got some challenges in terms of licensing, particularly on the events and festival sector, because they still call it a premises license, whether you're in a big field or you're under a roof. We've also got some issues in terms of planning, where we talk about things like agent of change, section 106, etc. Agent of change meaning that if a site is built next to a cultural space, the site that's being built after the cultural space is in situ needs to accommodate for the survival of that in layman's terms. So what we're saying is, if you're building a residential block right next to a nightclub, this needs to be soundproofed to a level that it's not going to impact on the venue or the residents.
So that's good.
So that's kind of how agent of change, in a very, very basic terms, works. It's a hell of a lot more complex.
I could imagine.
It's just been adopted, and this is why I was saying about Scotland being fantastic. It's just been adopted in primary sort of legislation in Scotland, where agent of change has been sort of highlighted as one of the sort of key sort of challenges out there that need to be sort of dealt with. The big thing that we're working on at the moment is the House of Lords did a review several years back on the Licensing Act. And what they discussed at the time is the responsible authorities, which are the police, planning, LGA licensing, EHO, they asked, do they communicate with each other? And the response was no. So as you can appreciate, when a planning application goes through, licensing don't know about it, policing don't know about it, and EHO don't. So when a license goes in, similarly the other way around.
Sure.
So the question for the House of Lords was, why? We don't really understand why there's no communication infrastructure in terms of inputting on a point of planning, so that we don't get to the point that we've got legacy noise issues or legacy issues where a family can live in the city centre, but they can't live with a nightclub being across the road. We need to start understanding the landscape. And we've got several examples of that as a challenge. But, that's something that's being addressed at the moment. There's a big workshop going on alongside the Institute of Licensing and the Home Office, where we're working on some recommendations in terms of communication infrastructure, which long term, and I'm not saying overnight, will change the landscape in terms of planning and licensing and how they work together. I know that's it. I'm trying to keep it in sort of simple terms as possible.
Of course.
Technically, sort of, but there's some great things happening, but it's all sort of the impacts 5 years down the line, not today, which is where our challenges are. We need to start impacting today, and people starting to take the mantle. But I think that's always the case, whether you go back and you start talking about drug testing and all these sort of things that came out as well. So
Yeah. So you've got quite a good perspective across the whole of the UK, dealing with clubs, bars, late night venues. Is there any sort of, I'm assuming obviously every city or town is quite different, but is there any area at the moment that's doing particularly well, sort of some good success stories? So you mentioned Glasgow, is there other areas across the
I mean,
country?
it's, I've recently gone to Bristol and Birmingham and held private dining sort of experiences with authorities and operators. Bristol has got a booming sort of festival and event sector. It's known for its music. And there's some fantastic initiatives coming out of it. Birmingham has just got the games coming to it in 2022, so everyone's prepping for that to sort of move forward. You've got the likes of Manchester, which we were quite instrumental in working alongside Sacha Lord in becoming the nighttime advisor for Andy Burnham, and he's doing a fantastic job. He's just released his nighttime economy strategy, which is great. He's coming to do a talk with us in Manchester on the 30th of sorry, I can't remember the date now, 30th of October, at GAY in Manchester, to talk about inclusivity, etc. So, there's some real sort of positive things going on. And as I say, Northampton with the CIRV side of things, we're working in London with Get Ahead Festival, which is a wellbeing and mental health charity, on doing complete days next year, where we're going to sit down with nighttime sector workers and start working towards them managing their well-being and mental health, because they have such unsociable hours. And the easy link in is, with respect, is the likes of alcohol and late nights and etc. And people need to start looking after themselves to maintain and be as effective as possible, and also to be able to develop. So I think there's some positive initiatives about. There's a lot of work going on. But it's like you say, it's like you said, it's broad, it's wide. There's so much happening. There's the one thing we do is not only get involved, but we also make sure that people are aware.
Right.
So that's the biggest point for us, is as much awareness as it is engagement, because a lot of people out there don't realise how much hard work is going into the sector as a whole. Yeah,
I mean, you said in 5 years' time, hopefully we'll be able to see the impact of the work you're doing now. What's the out of all the things you're putting into place, what's the biggest change that you want to see happen, say in 5 years' time?
I'd like to see in terms of events and festivals, a change in the licensing structure, because for it to flourish, that needs to change pretty quickly. We have got some challenges with regard to door security at the moment. The SIA, there is a massive shortcoming in terms of resource and doors. So in other words, there's not enough door staff to go around. And come the summer, when you've got the festivals and some of those door staff come off the doors, we're actually left short. And the quality of door security at the moment is quite low. So we're working with the security sector, SIA, Home Office and operators, to ensure we get to a point that potentially we can start business licensing operators. And then we have a catch-22 in terms of, because as you can imagine, if you're a member of a door security firm and there is an incident on the door and you're suspended from the door until the incident is investigated, you don't get paid. So as you can appreciate, it's a very, it's not very volatile, but it's a very vulnerable position given the wrong circumstances or the wrong interpretation. So we are working with the PSA in Southern Ireland at the moment. We've got a scheme where they work with the Department of Work and Pensions. So they have a pension input, they have business licensing. If someone's suspended, their pay is covered for a couple of weeks while the suspension is being dealt with. So there's a hell of a lot more of a professional view in terms of that security sector. And the other element to it is if you think about it, we did a big survey through the SIA over the last couple of months, and what they found there, they put a survey out asking what the usage of all the new applications for door security badges were. And 73% of the feedback is they were going to go and work in Tesco's, Marks and Spencer's, etc., not on resale licensing. So from that perspective, if 10,000 people applied, 7,300 of them are going to go and work in retail 6 days a week, same hourly rate, more hours, less risk, etc. And we wonder why people are not going to go for 12 hours for the same pay rate with a greater risk, particularly with knife crime and all that side of things. So we need to start working on the PR, the reasoning, the development, the grading, the rates, etc. Because at some point that's also going to be another issue that's going to hit the operator. The operator, once it gets to a point the resource gets scarce, resource pricing goes up. And that's where we're, going to see even more increased cost. Yeah. And particularly the fact that licensing are now putting numbers of door staff on licenses so they can't operate. If you can imagine, if London, it says that you've got to have 10 door staff on a Friday night between the hours of 7 and 1 in the morning, and you can only get 8, you can't open your doors.
Is that regardless of attendance as well?
Regardless of attendance. Some of the licenses out there actually say that, which have gone through. And the fact of the matter is there are some venues potentially that wouldn't be able to open.
It could be quiet on a Friday and overstaffed and
that happens at the moment. But the fact of the matter is, if you can't get the staff to open, you can't open.
Can't open in the first place, yeah.
So it's there are some dynamics with what's been presented out there in terms of licensing. And we've got the likes of central licensing involved in these discussions as well. But, we need to progress and there needs to be some traction, which is, we're producing a white paper at the moment in terms of recommendations. The challenge we've got at the moment is everything is about Brexit.
Yeah.
So we're trying to sort of engage in that, but, nothing straightforward. There's so many issues that we need to sort of address that, we've got to pick the ones that we can win and then sort of start slow burning the other ones.
Yeah, makes sense. So one last question from me. Again, the fact that you've got such a good insight across the country, what is, in terms of like the venues opening and closing, you've seen like negative press, the amount of clubs closing over the past 10 years. Is your opinion that that's sort of bottomed out now and maybe on the rise in terms of venues closing, new venues opening, or are we still going through quite a sort of a bad patch of venues closing? What's your take on it?
I think that there is a constant threat of venues closing, particularly with some of the cost implications to the nighttime economy at the moment. So I think we're still in a place where it's a little bit rocky. I think there is a little bit of displacement, if I'm going to be honest. So events and festivals are a stronger sort of position because you've not got the commitments of bricks and mortar. There is a resurgence in several areas in terms of things like, the likes of Street Feast and these sort of things, which are starting to dominate some of the marketplaces in terms of slightly older customers. Yes, we are losing venues without a doubt. There's no shadow of a doubt that we're losing pubs and etc. But consumer habits are changing as well. So I think there is somewhat truth to what you're saying, but I think there is also this false economy where there is a displacement. Yeah. So people are going out for activities more than anything. I mean, you talk about ghetto golf and all these sort of things, axe throwing, all these sort of things that are going out for, which are starting to, as I say, that resurgence of alcohol and activity coverage, which are starting to come forward and make a difference. How that's going to expand, I can't sort of, what I can see at the moment is you've got the bricks and mortar in terms of venues, cultural spaces, clubs, dance venues, then activity venues, then you've got events which are being displaced and held for 10 weeks, sort of jaunts, etc. Then you've obviously got the festivals, but festivals and events are flourishing. Bricks and mortar are challenged if they stay static. The corporates are finding it quite tough at the moment because, the McDonald's of the club world just seem to be very, they're stale in their ways. There's only so much you can do when you build DJ consoles and walk around the back of them, that sort of old sort of feel. Everything's very stage orientated. And the versatility of venues like things like studio spaces and Fold, where I've been today, have become quite an important piece in terms of utilising midweek as well as utilising the weekends for your own site. So the versatility of venues as a whole, rather than nightclubs as a label, and nightclubs being the one thing that's really going completely, is probably where I see things going. It's the versatility that makes it something interesting for the future. And whether that versatility develops in a different, I've heard so many different dynamics to theories and initiatives and investment programs and, pubs which are, created into amphitheatres, and there's lots of different things
to maximise it,
which are great. Yeah. But it's once you get to that position. I mean, we talk about things like beer keller. You've got all these sort of things which are infiltrating where we are, which is really just a party venue, but driven down a theme. So, where in 10, 15, 20 years ago, you would have a theme bar. Those theme bars are gone. Nightclubs are now venues. Festivals and events, have taken hold of some of that sort of summer trade, which is changing. So there has been an evolution. And food, I mean, if you think about it, I spoke to Jonathan Downey the other day at our board meeting, and Latitude had street feasts there with 44 food traders in a massive food market, and he said it was absolutely off the chart. It was amazing. People, the embracing that sort of Mediterranean food, drink culture within a social environment is flown. And he's just opened a site in Manchester as well. So, you can see those sort of things flourishing without a doubt. But yeah, there are challenges. If the people who have stayed static and just been what they are started to find it a struggle. But I do think there is a displacement in terms of consumer within the marketplace. So I don't think we're losing consumers. I just think they're deciding to make different decisions in terms of their social engagement.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I can honestly say that's one of the most thought-provoking. Do I want to use that? I'm not quite sure. There's a lot of points, very insightful. There's a lot of points. You've put my mind at ease with certain things that I've thought about over the years, why venues close and whatnot, and now it kind of makes sense. It's not just down to the developers. There's so many different variables that are in place. So yeah, but I just really want to thank you for coming down.
Oh, you're welcome.
We've got a great show. We're looking forward to putting this out, and I'm sure it'll ruffle a few feathers.
No, well, hopefully. I mean, hey, listen, if we get 10 people to react and realise that there needs some change, then this has been fantastic for us. So
I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming down.
Thank you.
Cheers.